The Galactic Meeting and the Mockery. The Grand Galactic Assembly was held once every 10 years, bringing together the most powerful species in the universe. It was a place where empires discussed peace, war, and the future of the galaxy. This year, humans were attending as new members. They had fought hard to earn their place, proving their intelligence and resilience. But despite their achievements, many alien races still saw them as weak, primitive, and strange. The hall of the assembly was vast, filled with hundreds of alien leaders, each representing a different civilization. Some had scales, others had fur, some had multiple eyes, while others had no visible face at all. At the center of the chamber stood Commander Elias Carter, representing humanity. His uniform was clean, his posture strong, and his expression unreadable. He had learned that in a room full of predators, showing weakness was dangerous. The mockery begins. The meeting began with discussions on trade, security, and diplomacy. But soon, the topic shifted to an unexpected subject: humans and their so-called pets. The Xeraxians, a reptilian race known for their strength and battle tactics, were the first to speak. Their leader, Overlord Kevor, leaned forward, his golden eyes gleaming with amusement. "Humans are an interesting species," he said, his voice thick with mockery. "You have survived against impossible odds, built great cities, and even fought powerful enemies. And yet, you keep weak creatures by your side." A ripple of laughter spread through the assembly. Other species joined in, nodding in agreement. The Drelkin, a species of tall, insect-like beings, clicked their mandibles. "Yes, we have seen this. Humans keep tiny, defenseless creatures. They feed them, protect them, even let them sleep inside their own homes." The laughter grew louder. The Morguliths, a race of telepathic energy beings, pulsed with amusement. "Illogical behavior," one of them said. "Resources should not be wasted on the weak." Commander Carter remained silent, watching them carefully. He had expected this. The Xeraxian leader continued, his voice filled with confidence. "In our worlds, the weak are abandoned. They either learn to survive or they perish. That is the way of strength. But humans, you carry your weakness with you. You protect creatures that serve no real purpose. Why?" The human response. Carter finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a quiet strength behind it. "We do not see them as weak," he said. "We see them as family." A moment of silence followed. Then, more laughter. The Xeraxian leader smirked. "Family. Ridiculous. We use beasts for war. We train creatures to fight. But we do not treat them as equals. That is foolishness." Another alien, a tall, skeletal being from the Telnor Empire, shook its head. "Humans waste time and effort on pointless emotional attachments." Carter did not argue. He only smiled. "Perhaps," he said, "or maybe we know something you don't." The Xeraxian leader's eyes narrowed. He did not like being challenged. "And what would that be, human?" Carter leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You think strength is about being alone. We think strength is about standing together. And one day, you will see the difference." The Xeraxian leader scoffed, waving a clawed hand. "We shall see." The unexpected distress call. Just as the discussion was about to move on, a loud alarm suddenly echoed through the hall. A red holographic display appeared in the center of the room, showing a distress signal from a distant human colony, Vega 7. Static-filled voices came through the transmission. "This is Outpost Vega 7. We are under attack. Unknown enemy. Massive numbers. Request immediate backup." Then, only silence. The assembly chamber fell quiet. The only sound was the beeping of the distress signal, playing over and over. Carter's expression turned cold. He turned to his officers. "Prepare a rescue team. We leave immediately." The Xeraxians laughed again. "Sending more humans to die." Overlord Kevor sneered. "Typical. You are too attached to your own kind." But Carter ignored him. He and his team headed for their ship. And behind them, moving with silent loyalty, were their pets, the very creatures the aliens had mocked. The Xeraxians watched in disbelief. "Are they taking their pets to battle?" one of them muttered. Kivor shook his head, his voice dripping with amusement. "Fools. They will learn soon enough." But he had no idea just how wrong he was. The unseen invasion. The stars above Vega 7 were silent, unaware of the horror unfolding below. The planet, once a thriving human colony, was now a graveyard. Buildings stood in ruins, smoke curled into the sky, and the only sound that remained was the eerie hum of something unnatural lurking in the shadows. The distress signal had gone silent. No one knew what had happened. No one knew if there were survivors. And yet the rescue ship carrying Commander Elias Carter and his team was speeding toward Vega 7 at full thrust. They were going in blind. A mission into darkness. Inside the battlecruiser Tempest, tension ran high. The team of human soldiers moved quickly, checking weapons, securing armor, and preparing for what awaited them. The air was thick with unspoken fear. A voice crackled over the comms. "Commander, scans show no life signs. The entire colony, it's just gone." Carter's jaw tightened. Something was wrong. Even if people had died, their bodies should still be there. But the scanners showed nothing, as if the entire population had simply vanished. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. "Sir," one of the officers spoke, hesitating. What if this is a trap?" Carter's voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. "It doesn't matter. If there's a chance anyone is alive, we go in." A low growl came from behind him. Atlas, Carter's massive, cyber-enhanced war dog, sat patiently by his side. His golden eyes, glowing faintly from their neural implants, watched his master's every move. Other soldiers had their own companions, tigers in light exo-armor, hawks with cybernetic wings, even small, agile foxes equipped with stealth tech. They were not just animals. They were part of the team. As the ship descended through the thick clouds, the planet below came into view. What they saw made their blood run cold. The silent massacre. The colony was in ruins. Buildings were torn apart, as if something massive had ripped through them. But what was worse, there were no bodies. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just an emptiness that made the skin crawl. Carter stepped forward, his boots crunching against broken glass. Atlas sniffed the air, his ears twitching, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. "Stay sharp," Carter said, scanning the ruins. The team spread out, moving with practiced precision. Their pets moved with them, ears up, tails stiff, listening for something humans could not hear. Then, a low chittering sound echoed through the empty streets. Not human, not friendly. And it was close. The first attack. Movement, right flank. A soldier barely got the warning out before something lunged from the shadows. It moved too fast, a black blur with too many limbs, too many eyes. It struck with razor-sharp claws, slicing through armor like paper. The soldier had no time to scream. Atlas reacted first. The war dog lunged, his titanium-reinforced jaws locking onto the creature's throat. The alien shrieked, a horrifying, inhuman sound, as Atlas dragged it down. Soldiers opened fire, bullets ripping through the monster's body. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then the walls began to move. Dozens, no, hundreds, of those creatures emerged from the darkness. Their glowing red eyes locked onto the humans. Their bodies, sleek and insect-like, pulsed as they shifted, adapting to the light. A voice crackled in the comms. "Xathid swarm. Oh God, it's the Xathid swarm." The Xeraxians had mocked humans for keeping pets. But now, as the first wave of monsters charged, teeth bared, claws raised, the humans were about to show them why those pets were their greatest weapon. Unleashing the beasts. The first attack came like a nightmare, silent, sudden, and deadly. The Xathid swarm moved like a black tide, flowing through the ruins of Vega 7. Their many-eyed faces reflected the dim moonlight, their jagged limbs clicking against the rubble. They were fast, too fast for any normal soldier to react. But the humans weren't alone. They had brought something the galaxy had never seen before. The first kill. The Xathid lunged, mandibles wide, claws ready to tear through the human squad. Before it could strike, Atlas moved. The cybernetic war dog leaped, its reinforced jaws locking onto the creature's throat. The Xathid shrieked, thrashing wildly, but Atlas held firm. A second later, he twisted. Snap! The alien collapsed, its body twitching. For the first time, the swarm hesitated. They had never faced prey that fought back. And then, the other pets moved. Not just pets, warriors. From the shadows, more creatures joined the fight. Not the Xathid, but the human companions. A massive tiger in exo-armor launched itself at an approaching enemy, its enhanced claws cutting through chitin like paper. Above, cybernetic falcons with razor-sharp talons swooped down, tearing at alien eyes, blinding them mid-charge. A soldier pointed. Go, striker. A sleek, jet-black wolf with reinforced plating dodged between the swarm, its enhanced reflexes outpacing even the fastest of the Xathid. It leaped onto an enemy's back, tearing through it with precision. For the first time, the Xathid swarm was confused. They had invaded hundreds of worlds, wiped out civilizations, but this was different. Their enemies weren't just human. Their enemies weren't weak. They fought as a pack. The Xeraxians watched in shock. Back at the Grand Galactic Assembly, the battle was being broadcasted live. The Xeraxian leader, Overlord Kavor, watched with narrowed eyes. This is impossible, he muttered. The other aliens, the ones who had mocked humans for keeping pets, now sat in stunned silence. The humans weren't just surviving. They were winning. The final stand of Vega 7. Commander Carter moved through the battlefield, a living storm. His rifle never stopped firing. His commands never wavered. Hold the line, he barked. Atlas ran at his side, bloodied but unbroken. The Xathid were realizing their mistake. They had underestimated humans. They had thought them weak because they cared. But loyalty was not weakness. It was the greatest strength of all. And when the Xathid queen finally arrived, towering above them, her rage shaking the ground, the humans and their beasts were ready. The bloodbath and the loyalty. The battlefield was painted in smoke, fire, and blood. The Xathid swarm, creatures that had devoured civilizations, were now the hunted. The air was thick with the scent of burnt chitin and the metallic tang of spilled human blood. But the humans were still standing. Their beasts were still fighting. For every soldier that fell, a war dog dragged an enemy down. For every beast that bled, a human fought harder. And in the middle of the carnage, Commander Carter stood tall, his rifle smoking, his cybernetic war dog, Atlas, growling beside him. The aliens who had mocked them were now watching in horrified silence. The price of loyalty. Fall back, someone shouted over the comms. But the humans didn't retreat, they held their ground. Then, a scream. A human soldier went down, pinned beneath a thrashing Xathid. Its talons pierced his armor, its mandibles closing in for the kill. Before it could strike, a blur of fur and steel crashed into it. It was a war dog, small compared to the monster, but it did not hesitate. Teeth sank into the alien's throat. The creature screeched, flailing wildly, but the dog held on, even as claws ripped into its side. The dog didn't let go. Even when it was torn apart, it never let go. The soldier it had saved scrambled back, horror in his eyes as his loyal companion lay still, its lifeless body still clinging to the enemy's throat. The battlefield went quiet. Even the Xathid hesitated. And then, the humans snapped. The wrath of humanity. The soldiers charged. Rage burned in their eyes. Their war beasts, their family, had blood for them. Now, it was time for revenge. The tigers leaped onto the biggest Xathids, ripping through them with mechanically enhanced claws. The cyber hawks screamed overhead, blinding enemies with precision strikes. And then came Atlas. He moved like lightning, weaving through the chaos, dodging claws, taking down 3 enemies before leaping onto a massive Xathid warrior. He didn't just bite. He ripped the alien's throat out. The swarm began to break. The creatures who had never lost a war were now running. The galaxy watches in shock. Across the galaxy, the Grand Assembly watched the broadcast in stunned silence. The Xeraxian overlord, who had once laughed at humans, now gripped his seat, eyes wide with disbelief. They fight like beasts themselves, one alien whispered. Another, a Morgulith, pulsed with unease. No, they fight like something worse. The camera zoomed in to the fallen war dog. Its lifeless body lay beside the Xathid it had taken down, and beside it, the human soldier knelt, placing a trembling hand on his companion's head. "Good boy," he whispered. His voice broke. The assembly hall was silent. For the first time, they understood. Humans did not just keep pets. They fought for them. They died for them. And in return, their animals did the same. Loyalty was not weakness. It was the deadliest strength in the universe. And the war wasn't over yet, because from the shadows, something much bigger was coming. The final stand. The battlefield was a graveyard of monsters. Xathid corpses lay in heaps, their blackened blood soaking into the cracked ground. The ruins of Vega 7 burned around them, casting long shadows through the smoke-filled air. And yet, it wasn't over. A tremor rumbled beneath their feet. The air grew heavy, charged with something ancient and terrifying. The remaining Xathid swarm froze, their many red eyes flickering with something humans had never seen in them before. Fear. Then, from the darkness beyond the colony ruins, it came. The Xathid Queen. Towering like a living nightmare, her massive armored body gleamed under the firelight. Her elongated skull had no eyes, but she didn't need them. She could feel them. She had watched her children die. Now she would wipe them all out. The last line of defense. Commander Carter stood in the middle of the wreckage, gripping his rifle. Blood dripped from a wound on his forehead, but he didn't care. Atlas, his war dog, stood beside him, growling, a deep primal sound. The remaining soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. The battle had taken everything from them. They were bleeding, broken, and exhausted. But they weren't dead. And as long as they were breathing, they would fight. "This is it," Carter said, voice low. "We hold the line." No one questioned him. They never did. The last war beasts stood ready, battered, bloodied, but unshaken. The cybernetic hawks circled overhead, waiting for their moment. The tigers lowered themselves into attack position, their tails flicking. Atlas stared down the queen, his teeth bared. Then she screeched. The sound was a physical force, shaking the ground, rattling the bones in their bodies. And then she charged. A suicide mission. "Fire everything," Carter roared. The soldiers unleashed hell. Bullets, explosives, everything they had. But the queen was unstoppable. Her thick, armored hide absorbed the gunfire. She crashed through ruins like they were made of paper. With one swing of her massive bladed limbs, she tore through 3 soldiers at once. And still, they did not run. But they were losing. Then, a single howl split the chaos. Atlas. Carter turned just in time to see his war dog breaking into a full sprint, straight toward the queen. "No," Carter shouted, but it was too late. Atlas knew. He had been bred for this, engineered for this. He was not just a pet. He was a warrior. A red light blinked on his collar, his last command. A suicide command. Atlas leaped. The queen saw him too late. A split second later, Boom! The explosion lit up the night. Atlas's implants detonated, tearing a massive hole into the Queen's armor. Her deafening scream shattered the air as she staggered, her flesh exposed. And Carter did not hesitate. He raised his weapon, steady despite the pain. He pulled the trigger. One shot, straight through the Queen's head. She collapsed with a final, earth-shaking thud. The battlefield went silent. Then the remaining Xathid swarm ran. For the first time in history, the monsters were the ones who fled. The price of victory. The dust settled. The war was over. Carter dropped to his knees beside Atlas's remains. The cybernetic enhancements had been destroyed in the explosion, leaving only his broken body. Carter reached out, his hand shaking. He rested it on Atlas's head. "Good boy." His voice cracked. The soldiers stood in silence. The war beasts, the ones who had survived, lowered their heads. This was not just the end of a battle. This was the end of a legend. And in that moment, the galaxy finally understood. The aliens had called them weak for their attachments. They had laughed at humans for keeping pets. But now, they saw the truth. Loyalty was not weakness. It was the deadliest force in the universe, and humanity would never, ever stand alone. A new respect. The battlefield was silent. The queen of the Xathid swarm lay motionless, her monstrous body sprawled across the ruins of Vega 7. The remaining swarm, once a relentless tide of death, had flowed into the shadows, broken and afraid. The humans had won. But no one was celebrating. Commander Carter knelt beside Atlas's remains, his war dog's lifeless form resting in the dust. Around him, other soldiers did the same, kneeling beside their fallen beasts, their companions, their family. These creatures had fought for them, died for them. And now, the humans mourned them like their own. But far beyond the battlefield, across the cold void of space, the rest of the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The galaxy seized the truth. Inside the Grand Galactic Assembly, the live broadcast of the battle had just ended. The alien leaders, once so quick to mock humanity, now sat in a heavy, uncomfortable silence. No one spoke. No one laughed. The Xeraxian overlord K4, who had once mocked humans for their pets, clenched his fists. His reptilian eyes stayed locked on the image of Atlas, frozen on the screen, a beast who had sacrificed itself not out of fear, but out of love. They die for them. One alien leader finally whispered. A Morgalath, whose species prided itself on cold logic, pulsed with uncertainty. This does not make sense. Why would a creature throw away its life for another? A Xelnora general, his skeletal form shifting uneasily, muttered, because they are not just beasts. They are something else entirely. Kivor gritted his teeth. He had spent years believing strength came from power, from domination. He had believed that the weak were meant to be discarded. And yet, he had just watched an entire army fight to the last breath, not for survival, but for loyalty. He looked at the human representative sitting across from him, Ambassador Rains. She was calm, unreadable, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes as she spoke. Now you understand. Kivor exhaled sharply. He did understand. And for the first time in his life, he felt something strange, something unfamiliar. Respect. The funeral of the fallen. Back on Vega 7, the humans did not waste time. They built graves, not just for their fallen soldiers, but for their beasts as well. Each war dog, each cybernetic hawk, each exo-armored tiger was given the same honor as any human soldier. Their names were spoken. Their stories were remembered. And as the first grave was sealed, Carter stood before his men, voice steady but heavy. They called them pets. He glanced at the sky, where the stars still shined over the ruins. They were never just pets. He knelt, resting a hand on Atlas's head one last time. They were warriors. A single moment of silence followed. Then, one by one, Every surviving soldier raised their weapons in salute. The sound of gunfire echoed into the night, a final farewell to the ones who had saved them all. A new legacy. In the following months, something changed. The galaxy no longer mocked humanity for keeping animals. Instead, they began to learn from them. The Ziraxians, once firm believers in survival of the fittest, began training more beasts of their own. The Drelkin, the insectoid race who had laughed at humans for their emotional attachments, now welcomed creatures into their cities. Even the Morgalath, beings of pure energy, admitted that there was something in humanity's bond with their beasts that could not be explained. And slowly, across the stars, other species began keeping companions. Not for war, not for strategy, but for something deeper. Because the lesson had been learned. Loyalty was not weakness. It was humanity's greatest weapon. And now, it belonged to the entire galaxy. Never stand alone. The war was over. The battlefield of Vega 7 had turned to dust, its ruins silent under the weight of history. The Xathid swarm had been driven back, their queen destroyed. The galaxy had witnessed the impossible. Humans, with their so-called pets, had turned the tide of war. But victories were not measured in bodies. They were measured in what remained, and what remained were graves. The memorial of the fallen. A monument now stood at the heart of the Vega 7 ruins. It was not for the soldiers. It was for the beasts. A towering steel statue of a war dog stood tall, its head raised high, its body scared but unbowed. At its feet, engraved in a language that every species could read, were just 4 words. They fought beside us. Commander Carter stood before it, his eyes locked on the nameplates below. The names of every beast that had died in the war. Atlas's name was at the top. The wind whispered through the ruins. Somewhere behind him, other soldiers stood in silent mourning. Even the Ziraxian overlord Kivor had come, though he said nothing. For once, there was no mockery. Only respect. Carter exhaled slowly. Then, without a word, he removed his own military badge. The one that marked him as a veteran, a survivor. And he placed it at the foot of the statue. The message was clear. They were never just pets. The ripple across the stars. The aftermath of Vega 7 spread like wildfire. The Ziraxians, once proud and arrogant, *** began training their own war beasts, ***, not as disposable tools, but as partners. The Drelkin, the insectoid race who had once sneered at human emotional attachments, began keeping animals of their own. At first, for study, then for companionship. Even the Morgalath, beings of pure energy who had never understood love or loyalty, built their first war sanctuaries, preserving and protecting creatures they once thought meaningless. Across the galaxy, species stopped laughing at human pets, and they started learning from them. The lesson that changed the universe. The Grand Galactic Assembly had convened once more, a year after Vega 7. This time, there was no mockery, only curiosity. The assembled leaders watched as a young Ziraxian warrior entered the chamber. Beside him walked a creature unlike anything the Ziraxians had ever kept before, a sleek, cybernetic wolf, moving in perfect sync with its master. The warrior did not sit alone. The wolf sat beside him. And when the Ziraxian overlord rose to speak, his voice was steady, no longer filled with arrogance. "We once called them weak," he admitted. "We called them fools. We were wrong." The chamber was silent. He turned toward the human delegation. "Teach us." The words carried through the hall like a shockwave. "Teach us how to fight beside them. Teach us how to stand together. Teach us what we never understood." Ambassador Rains smiled. "We already have." The final message. Carter sat alone in his quarters, staring at a single photograph. It was old, crumpled at the edges, but clear enough. A picture of him and Atlas, taken years before the war. A time when Atlas was just a pup, before the cybernetic implants, before the battle scars. Before he became a legend. Carter let out a slow breath. He never prayed. He wasn't even sure he believed in anything beyond the stars. But tonight, he whispered 2 words. Thank you. Outside, beyond the walls of the station, beyond the distant stars, something had changed. Humanity had not just won a war. They had left a mark on the galaxy. And from this moment forward, no one would ever stand alone again.